Thank you everyone for joining us today. I would like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. While we meet on a virtual platform, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the land, which we each call home. At Cove, we recognize, acknowledge, and express our gratitude and respect for the privilege to work and to live in Mi'kma'ki, the traditional, ancestral, and unceded lands of the Mi'kmaq peoples. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and traditional lands and territories of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations peoples that call this nation home. Please join me in a moment of reflection to acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Thank you everyone for joining us. Oh, it's not. Thank you. Sorry, some technical challenges here. Welcome to our panelists. We have Christopher Gugu. Chris Gugu is a proud member of the Waccamaw First Nations living in Millbrook with his wife and 3 children. Since joining Ulnaweg in 2000, he has helped hundreds of Aboriginal entrepreneurs secure loans and access business services. He has played a key role in bringing Digital Mi'kmaq, an enriched education program to Indigenous communities across Nova Scotia and expanding into Atlantic Canada. Appointed General Manager in 2006, he is now the Chief Operating Officer of Ulnaweg Development Group, an Aboriginal financial institution which has expanded with 2 additional organizations, the Ulnaweg Education Center and the Ulnaweg Indigenous Communities Foundation, which he is the Executive Director of. The foundation works in strengthening the relationship between Canada's philanthropic sector and Indigenous communities of Canada. Chris is a board member of the Halifax Chamber of Commerce, Centre for Local Prosperity, Rural Communities Foundation of Nova Scotia, InnovaCorp, and the Community Sector Council of Nova Scotia. Chris's passion has always been creating opportunity in community and economic development, but most importantly about empowering Indigenous youth to bring about transformational change. One of his proudest moments in work was arranging the flight of a Mi'kmaq basket and eagle feather to the International Space Station with astronaut David Tapi Saint-Jacques. Chris holds a BBA from St. Francis Xavier University. Thank you for joining us today. We don't have Chief Sasha yet? No? So we also have Ken Paul with us today. Welcome, Ken. For 10 years, Ken was an engineer and hydrographer in charge with the Canadian Hydrographic Service, responsible for leading multi-beam sea bottom mapping operations along the Atlantic coast, the Brador Lakes, and offshore on multiple seaborne and land-based platforms. Following this, Ken was the Senior Aboriginal Policy Advisor for Parks Canada, working with Atlantic First Nations communities and senior park staff of 7 national parks and a number of historic sites. From June 2013 to August 2018, Ken was the Director of Fisheries and Integrated Resources for the Atlantic Policy Congress of First Nations Chiefs Secretariat. He supported the commercial fisheries and aquaculture among the 30 First Nation communities along the Atlantic Gaspé region. He was also responsible for policy development in renewable energy, environment, climate change policies at both regional and national levels. In 2018, Ken accepted the role of Director of Fisheries for the Assembly of First Nations, responsible at a national level for supporting chiefs and First Nations regional organizations on fisheries-related issues in policy, advocacy, and research. Ken was also an Indigenous delegate to Ocean OBS 19, promoting the ethical use of Indigenous knowledge and the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples to the international ocean science community. Ken has a master's in business administration from St. Mary's University and a Bachelor of Science degree from Dalhousie University with a major in mathematics. Ken is a member of the Maliset First Nation in Tobique, New Brunswick, and a dedicated father of 2. Thank you for joining us, Ken. And Noah Stevens, a Mi'kmaq born in Nova Scotia. He is an experienced app developer, programmer, 3D artist, and animator. Noah has a background in filmmaking and is known in industry circles for his creative and multidisciplinary skills. Noah's experience allows 3D Wave to successfully deliver high-quality, cutting-edge products to its clients. In 2012, Noah directed the short film, Take the Train Home, that was selected for broadcast by the Canadian Broadcast Corporation. He is the recipient of the William F. White NSCC Filmmaker Award for that year, for 2012. And welcome, Noah. Glad to have you here. And we do have Chief Sasha. Oh, hang tight. We have technology on our side.
Wahoo!
And Chief Sasha is here with us. Chief Sasha Labilwa Kennedy is Mi'kmaq and is the chief of the Eel River Bar First Nation in New Brunswick, Canada. She has first served as a councillor for 2 years before being elected chief in June of 2019. She has a BBA from UNB and is working on her MBA in Community Economic Development through CBU Executive Program. She served as the First Nations Economic Development Officer since February of 2008, earning her a nomination for Economic Development Officer of the Year in 2017 by CANDU, a national Indigenous organization involved in community economic development. Chief Sasha is a mother of 4 boys, a wife, and is fluent in both English and French. Her grandmother is Margaret Labilwa, the first woman in New Brunswick to be named a chief of a First Nations community in 1970. Welcome, Chief Sasha. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
So we're going to start with Ken Paul. So Ken, you've had a very long and distinguished career in the marine industry, and we were hoping that you wouldn't mind describing your career path, how you got to where you are, and what your sources of inspiration or help were that helped you along the way and perhaps overcome any barriers that you faced.
I always like to introduce myself from my language when I start because it honors the ancestors. I would say that one of the biggest inspirations for myself was my grandfather, Charles Paul, Dr. Charles Paul. He was actually the first person that gave me my first job. He actually had me mow his lawn. He also had me wash his car from time to time, and those were like $5 jobs. But as a young person, I really liked making my own dough, as he would say. I've always been fortunate that I've been able to work part-time throughout my time in high school and in university. And I was always able to land summer employment, even though some of the summer jobs are kind of sketchy. Like I used to wash windows on some of the tall buildings downtown in Halifax, like the Maritime Center and places like that. I also worked on road crews, but I never really had any direction. When I went to when I left high school and went into university, I majored in mathematics because that was my strength. It was my best mark in school, and I really had no career counseling. And I was the only Native student within the entire science program. But along the way, I had a summer job in one of the Canada Employment Centers, filling out one of their libraries for career development, academic calendars. And a woman from DFO named Shirley Parker had heard about me. She asked to meet with me, and she knew that I was taking math and engineering courses at Dalhousie University. So she recommended that I actually apply to the hydrographic service for summer employment the following year. And, you know, I didn't really know what it was about, but she followed up with me over the winter as well. So I ended up starting to work at the Bedford Institute in the summer of 1991. I was 3 weeks running around in the Bedford Basin on the little boats, trying to take the multi-beam sonar, which was a new technology at the time, and global positioning systems, GPS, which also was a new technology at the time, learning them myself and teaching them to the older hydrographers that had been spent their entire careers within the hydrographic service and starting out in dories, throwing lead lines over the side with a sextant, trying to pick off flags for positioning. Later that summer, they sent us up to Newfoundland on a shore party for 3 months. And I couldn't believe that I was actually able to work on boats and be paid for it. So that following year, I graduated and I started a career with the hydrographic service, but they knew that I lacked some courses. So the director at the time was Paul Bernmer, and he was able to send me to the College of Geographic Sciences, COGS, in the Valley for 4 months to improve on my survey knowledge, and then to the University of New Brunswick in the geomatics department to learn some more survey engineering. It was those two individuals that really helped to launch my career, and I ended up spending 10 years with the hydrographic service because of that. I know that I was the first Native person to work in the hydrographic service that came out of the British Admiralty, and it was responsible for charting the ocean floor. I was ambitious as well, and that was the thing that I think was one of the differences for me. I didn't have any Native role models, but I was the youngest hydrographer in charge at the time, and my ambition was to become the Dominion hydrographer of Canada. But along the way, in 1999, the Marshall Decision happened. It was in September of 1999, and when I was looking around, I literally went overnight from that hydrographer to that Indian that works from DFO. And I didn't really pay too much attention to treaties and things like that at the time, but my colleagues changed. And so I had to really shift and start understanding what fisheries policy and what rights were all about. And there's another individual, Mike Sinclair, another regional director of science, that helped me transition and it was able to allow me to build partnerships with the Eskasoni Fish and Wildlife Commission in Cape Breton to do ocean mapping of the Brodor Lakes in partnership. So that was sort of what set my career path. Following that, I took a job with Parks Canada as a policy advisor. I worked with the National Parks in Atlantic Canada. I took a one-year assignment in the high Arctic, managing 3 national parks that were developed under comprehensive land claims. And after 10 years of that, I started working with the Atlantic Policy Congress of First Nations Chiefs. So I've been working with chiefs in fisheries policy and marine issues for the past 8 years. But that foundation that I had in the hydrographic service really helped to build a good base to launch into these other areas. And it allows me to relate to some of the challenges and difficulties that people who actually work in the ocean environment have to face. So I try to get more individuals to be encouraged to know that there are career options for them. Because I didn't have that. I was just lucky that some people along the way had opened up these doors for me. So that's generally like my career story at this point.
That's a wonderful career story. So a good, strong technical foundation, a strong work ethic, and really some people who help point you in the right direction seem to be sort of a key to the success that you've enjoyed in your career. Yeah. So thank you for that, Ken. So building on that, Chief Sasha, we are finding in Nova Scotia some imbalances between urban and rural opportunities that affect Indigenous youth and the communities. One of the examples that comes to mind is access to education. So from your perspective, how can we do a better job of capturing the hearts and minds of the young Indigenous youth in our communities to participate in the industries of the future, like the blue economy, the ocean sector, and how can we facilitate the access to education and the opportunities for the youth?
Well, I think Ken touched on a really good point when he brought up awareness of what career opportunities are in this blue industry, because a lot of our youth, you know, they see the commercial fishermen fishing lobster and crab and I guess the typical career paths that we see in our communities. but I don't think they're aware of the vast opportunities that are in this industry. And I think how we can address it is not by reinventing the wheel, but looking at some success stories. And I have to use JEDI, and I'm speaking for New Brunswick, of course, because I think they've done a really great job at introducing IT and trades and industry-specific opportunities to young people in New Brunswick.
Mm-hmm.
And they've also taken the extra step with their incubator programs and their business boot camps, where they pretty much guide entrepreneurs who are looking to develop an idea. So I think we need to partner with these types of successful organizations that are already in place. Because like when I think of Cove, it's very industry specific. And of course, we're going to have experts in the ocean cluster and the blue economy, but you know, promoting that and building that amongst youth, I think just by partnering with organizations and going right to the First Nation communities, talking to whether it's chief and council or your employment officer or the EDOs, the economic development officers. Often these people wear many hats, and they're the people who they know who's interested in entrepreneurship. They know who has the potential, and they can be an important link to building on this.
No, thank you very much for your insights there. And the acronym JEDI, does that stand?
That is the Joint Economic Development Initiative.
And that's specific to New Brunswick?
Yes, it is.
Okay, wonderful. So if people are interested, they can look into that.
Mm-hmm.
So perhaps going to the most youthful person on the panel, Noah, speaking of youth and speaking of networks, Sasha, pointed out that we have existing networks. We may need to reach out to perhaps individuals in positions that we may not have thought of before. So given the importance of networks and given the importance of networks in helping entrepreneurs get their start, Noah, the whole who you know versus what you know, and networks can open doors to customers, funding, and other opportunities. And really, we'd like to understand and learn about your journey with your company, 3D Wave, and how developing that network and where the sources of help were for you along the way.
Yeah, sure. I think the best way to start off would be to acknowledge the help. First off, Olneweg has been a great resource for us. They introduced us to Cove. We have a desk there because of them. And Cove has also been a really great resource because it's a shared office space where we are, so it connects us to very like-minded businesses, which has also created great opportunity for us. But to give you a little bit of history on our company and what we do, like you said earlier, my background is in filmmaking, so I'm a storyteller, but I'm also quite technical as well. I've been programming for a while and doing 3D animation as well, and I've applied that to the film industry and on some commercial projects. But I started moving away from that and freelancing on my own, and then I joined forces with my wife, who is also another co-founder of 3D Wave. Her name is Lena. She has a background in journalism, and her and I were sort of like a great tag team for video production. And then later on, we brought my father, Barry Stevens, who his background is in electronic engineering. And we had this really cool triforce of skill sets because with his technical background, my storytelling, and Lena's background with journalism, we would basically do 3D animations for local industry and organizations and businesses while providing sort of a consulting approach, because we'd come in looking in from the outside and help them with basically telling the story that they needed to promote a product or an idea. And that sort of leads into where we're at now with this whole software thing, because we had a really interesting opportunity visualizing GIS and scientific data with Nova Scotia Community College, the AGRG team in Middleton. And upon our research, we realized that there was a lot of technical innovation going into how terrain data such as LiDAR and height maps and all that stuff, digital elevation models was really advancing, and the data was pretty intensive. But it was being used for the scientific reports that were being generated, and the scientific reports were pretty status quo. So a lot of times, an engineering study would be done for a community or a municipality, and then that had to be interpreted by an engineer, for example. So we realized, because communication is absolutely paramount for understanding climate change, that it would be really interesting to see if there was technology out there that could take SLR, which is sea level rise data, fluvial data, hydrodynamic data, and actually present it in real time with an interactive 3D map that community members, citizens, civic engineers could look at to basically look at infrastructure at risk, to communicate potential risk as well to citizens. And yeah, we developed an online platform. We've had the privilege of working for some great municipalities. We worked with Lunenburg, engineering firms. One of our early adopters actually was Acadia Band First Nation. And we did several reserves for them and basically showed them low-lying areas that were at risk. We even started getting into fire simulations for tabletop emergency management training. And I think we're uniquely positioned because, like I said about our background, we realized that, as communicators, that we had an obligation to make sure that the data science and the information was understandable, because there's a lot of people either aloof to what's happening in terms of climate change, or they don't understand. But if you present it in a way that's not that's not too complicated, and you give them the benefit of the doubt, I've seen a lot of wide eyes, demonstrating our technology, even at the town hall level. And I'm very proud of where we're at. And to sort of go back to your question, now that I've sort of rambled about the history, just because you have a really innovative product doesn't necessarily mean that people will understand it. And so we need to basically be advocates ourselves and branch out our network and develop relationships with people and organizations who can be advocates for us. Because essentially there really isn't a market for our technology. We're helping define that market just because it doesn't really exist. It's never really been asked for. So without the help of organizations like On the Wig and Cove and NRC for some of our early funding, we wouldn't be here. We're 100% Indigenous-owned. We haven't had any investors come in and take away control of the company. Very, very, very privileged to be here, and it's because of help, and it's because of our network.
Wonderful. Thank you, Noah. It's an amazing journey, amazing journey. We look forward to seeing your future endeavors and successes as well. So Chris, we've heard about a good technical foundation. We've heard from Chief Sasha about the awareness and getting the awareness there for our youth. And we've heard about the importance of networks. So if you wouldn't mind describing for us through the work you do at Ulnoeg, the work you do with the youth and the communities, and how you help engage young people in careers of the future, and helping workers really find pathways into regional industries. What kind of careers are you hearing that people are interested in, and how can we collectively do a better job of socializing Indigenous youth for these STEM careers of the future? And I'll get you to unmute.
Thank you, Denise.
Thank you.
Following up on everyone's contribution right now, hits on a lot of the sectors that Ulnoeg's been involved in. I think when we're looking at the interests of kids out there now, and with our introduction of the new and innovative technologies that we've introduced them to, pretty much the interest that they've told us is basically the sky's the limit. You know, every time we introduce something innovative to them, they love it, right? And the interest builds, and it just keeps on building and building and building. And I think that's where we're, as a collective, from what has been said, can really work together to nurture that. And that's what we've been trying to do, is basically under our strategic initiatives program with Paul Langdon, we've been trying to build our linkages with the industry, as an example, to create pathways for students and also for individuals that are employed in other sectors that might have any interest in the ocean supercluster, for example. There is a program coming up in partnership with the JEDI and North Atlantic School as well, that we've received funding under the Ocean Supercluster. That is a career pivot program that we're very proud of, and Ken has been involved in developing that as well. We're very excited to do that. In terms of exposure to industry and socializing the kids, we've worked hard in trying to open those doors. And I think it's when you have examples like Ken himself, you know, his first in hydrographic services, for example, he mentioned. We had a session with kids where we introduced the concept in architecture in schools. And then as a conference, we brought in world-renowned architect Doug Cardinal, for example. So introduce an Indigenous person in that field that's done so much stuff. Ken mentioned that he was the first in hydro services. Doug Cardinal mentioned that to the kids there, that he was the first person ever to use computers in architecture. Not first Indigenous, first person, right? So those accomplishments, I think we need to highlight from, you know, areas in doctors and nursing, that we're seeing so much more activity in social media. That the people in those areas are very proud to say that they're in those areas. We have more people in practicing dentistry, for example, kinesiology, veterinary medicine, right? And I think with Digital Mi'kmaq, where we've introduced kids to concepts like animation, what Noah mentioned, 3D tech modeling. I know Barry Stevens has been involved in that. We've also introduced them to artificial intelligence, big data, robotics, both land and water. You know, these concepts that kids don't get introduced to in the public education system, we've been able to do that on top of what they're already learning in First Nation schools specifically. And really, we use the term in Mi'kmaq when we're trying to promote, socialize kids, nakalodaman, right? And the term is to get used to it. So when you're introducing them to big data, we introduce the concept to them so that they're used to it, even robotics, so that they're not afraid to go into these fields in high school and an interest, or even into university, engineering, mathematics. You know, you might, you know, hear kids, well, what am I going to do with algebra, for example? There's lots of things you can do with algebra, right? And the kids just need to know those, and need to be exposed to the Ken Pauls, the Noah Stevens, the Barry Stevenses, the Doug Cardinals of the world. So that's what we're trying to do. We're about to launch as well, Denise, a major program in youth empowerment. We're just finalizing agreements in that. But that's going to really ramp up our efforts as Ulnuik in partnering with organizations like JEDI, with MEBO and Cape Breton, with all the universities in Atlantic Canada, and with also industry like Ocean Supercluster and Cove. We're proud of Cove. We have 2 companies there, and we're adding another one, Chief Defense Contractor in New Brunswick, where we're able to provide that space for them. And as Noah said, to connect people that are like-minded and entrepreneurs as well, that your technology, you might not even thought of, you know, applying it to a certain way, but with entrepreneurs in the room, with everyone in the room, with an entrepreneur mind, you know, those can help and support your development as a business as well.
Amazing, amazing, and incredible, and such important work that you're doing, Chris, and the whole Olnoeg team. There's an expression, you can't be what you can't see. So the importance of those role models that the Indigenous youth can relate to is so important. So given those first sort of 4 questions and introductions to everyone, is there anything else anyone would like to add to what we've heard, or any of your thoughts? Got a quiet bunch.
I think what Chris said was just fantastic. And one point that he mentioned that I wanted to mention is just promoting the success stories, like he said, because if our youth see the Doug Cardinals and the Ken Pauls, it speaks volume. So thank you, Chris. And I'm delighted to hear all the initiatives that Olnoeg has on the go. Really good.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jim Hanlon here, the CEO at Cove, is asking if there was one disruptive thing that today's ocean tech business leaders could do to increase First Nations involvement in the growing blue economy, what would that be? And Noah?
Meaningful Indigenous inclusion. I find a lot of the Indigenous inclusion that is being floated around, it gets chalked up to being engaged, which can be an email or a call, and you're not really followed up. And I feel like with using our own company as an example, there's a lot of potential for mentorship, especially because we're in the early stages of development. We've done some pretty great things through connections and mentorship. We're processing digital elevation models on the fly. Our environmental data is becoming more and more complex. And I think being able to leverage Aboriginal inclusion that the government talks about and businesses and organizations talk about, to have a little bit more direct impact, meaningful interaction, I think would be really, really good. Because I think with technology that's as new and abstract and developing as ours, it could come a long way. And fostering, a business like ours could also help another generation see that, oh, I could do something very similar. Seeing the work that my father's done has been a big inspiration for me.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of my early career has been pivoting. I went to school to be a filmmaker, even though I had a background in programming and 3D animation. So there's been a lot to influence me and help me get to where I am, and the same goes for my father. So yeah, I think meaningful, direct Indigenous inclusion for not just organizations, but businesses like ours.
Fair. Thank you, Noah. And a little bit of a follow-up to that, Ken or Noah, or of course any of the panelists, the blue economy is truthfully intertwined with ecology and issues related to sustainable use of resources. And how can we connect Indigenous youth and the older workers who may be looking at a second career in the ocean sector? So how can we engage them while honoring the Indigenous values of caring and protecting for our waters and our oceans? Any thoughts on that?
If I could start, there's a couple of things I want to mention about youth. So I have an 18-year-old and a 22-year-old, and they grew up with this technology. They are part of not only like an Indigenous network across Canada, but really a global network. So our kids, our young people are woke. They are very good at understanding, like at least at a basic level, like the things around the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, treaties, all of these things dealing with culture through this digital medium.
Mm.
But the other thing that is important with our youth is they they're trying to figure out how to bring the culture and tradition and merge it with the rest of Western culture. I think that it's really important to acknowledge the role of our elders. And even though our elders may not be as technically savvy, this intergenerational sharing is really important because the youth are our learners and the elders are our teachers. And any time that we can bring those two groups together will be really important because it helps give the youth like perspective and helps reinforce values. Another thing that I would mention along these lines, because we're talking about the environment and sustainability, is this whole concept about Indigenous knowledge systems. I call it a system because knowledge is a way of learning, and these systems are a different way of learning rather than just a solely technical Western approach towards science and the environment. We promote that at the Assembly of First Nations. We are working with communities to develop Indigenous knowledge protocols so that we can empower the local communities. And when we call it a system, another thing that allows us to do, it allows the communities to also use modern tools such as databases, drones for ground truthing, modern video equipment, satellite technology to reinforce the information that's coming out. But the other thing I want to emphasize on this, like Indigenous knowledge is not just about what you know, it's about an approach. There's a whole value system in there. So if your science in the marine sector is simply looking at maximizing economic value of ocean resources, that does not exactly coincide with Indigenous values. We have to use the ocean to help support our economies, but we also know that if we don't know, we use naturally the concept of the precautionary approach, which is a natural value system within Indigenous communities, to save some for the future generations. Those kind of teachings are really valuable from the Native community, and I think that's something that could be incorporated within modern business practices. We know that we want to maximize value for shareholders, but sometimes maximizing value in the short term is going to cause problems in the long term. And the last point I'll make about youth is in our communities, our communities are big families, and we are used to having access to our political leaders, to our cultural leaders and things like that. If a young person is brought into a company, but they have a role and they have a job in the company, but they don't understand what the big picture is of that company, if they don't understand like how they're contributing to something, then a lot of times they may not stay. They may just look at it as a job. It's understanding like the role of an organization or a company that really inspires people to know that they're making a contribution. So those are kind of the things that come to mind when I hear a question like this.
Yeah, very well said. Very well said. Thank you for sharing that, Ken. Any thoughts from anyone else? He just said it so well. So we do have a question from Sandra Goodwin from Spark, Nova Scotia, and she's going back to the question around perhaps the disparities between rural and urban communities in Atlantic Canada, in Nova Scotia, and the gaps that exist there, access to education, perhaps access to opportunities. Perhaps there's greater access to cultural and chiefs and leaders within the rural communities. I'm not sure, but any thoughts around bridging those gaps, or if we think?
Well, if you want, I would like for the others to hear from the others too, but what I will say, so now we're in a COVID world, and I'm working here, I'm actually at my parents' house in Tobic, and outside is the Tobic River, and everything I do is I'm trying to bring the salmon back into this Tobic River. So that's my grounding. But because we've been working in this COVID chaos since March, we are realizing that we don't actually physically always have to be in an urban setting to do our work. what tends to happen, I've found over the years with young people, we send them off to school. Sometimes they get jobs in a remote area in like cities and things like that when they're away. But when they start to have families, they want to be closer to their home communities. And so there's less of a brain drain when we invest in the Indigenous workforce. We're not really doing a good job of that. We're not diversifying the job opportunities. But because of this COVID world that has fundamentally changed the way we work and the use of technology, I think we have the opportunity to actually do that. I would like to see like more opportunities placed in remote areas, and also when people are trying to recruit Native people into their organization, the organization itself should also try to train its employees and look at its work environment so that it actually is a welcoming environment for Indigenous peoples. So if there's only one or two Indigenous peoples that come into an organization and they don't have people that can sort of relate to, some of the family dynamics in a Native community, for example, then it's really hard for them to, fully invest themselves into the workforce. So, like the training, creating the foundation, the habitat, or the environment within a workforce is also very important than just simply recruiting. That's just an initial thought.
No, thank you. Thank you. Very insightful. Chief Sasha or Chris, would you like to add to that based on your perspectives?
I think what I'd add to that, Denise, is I do find one of the things that we look at in socializing youth, for example, is we're trying to, for example, get a project going with the SMU in Dalhousie, and it was an entrepreneurship camp focused on innovation. And but the goal wasn't necessarily to introduce kids to the innovation ecosystem, but more so the environment in which that innovation ecosystem exists in an urban setting. So it was, as Ken pointed out, when kids coming into an environment, they don't necessarily feel like they're part of that environment. For me, my interpretation of that, as personally, is that that is where the question of identity comes from, for myself, in my interpretation anyway, where the individual doesn't see themselves as a community member in an urban setting. So going back home, as Ken mentioned, his goal is filling the salmon back into that river. He's part of the community in that aspect, right? So when you take that person into an urban setting, they're no longer the uncle in the community, the kids, or the funny cousin, the funny uncle, or whatever, right? And so they lose that identity when they go into an urban setting, right? And I think that's very important for an Indigenous person, especially in a community where the community is an extension of their family as well, right? And you put them in an urban setting. If you don't introduce them to the social fabric of that community, then you might as well send them back home, right? Because that introduction is important in actually allowing them to be accepted in that community as well, regardless of race, right? But as an individual human being, what do you want? You want to be part of a community. You want to be part of a family. So if you don't work with that, if organizations don't work in accepting that, then you're going to have issues, and this work in connecting with the Indigenous people, I think, I've said it many times, it's not a 9-to-5 thing. It can't be a 9-to-5 thing. It can't be a company policy, right? It has to be involved. It has to involve the individuals within the company from the bottom to the top, and everybody has to kind of roll with it, right?
If I can sort of add to that, I think COVID has reinforced that there is a lot of opportunities to be connected digitally. I know that's sort of reinforced my opinion, because when I was living in Halifax and I was doing a lot of my work in Halifax, and then I went back home for a bit during the pandemic, and I was doing quite a bit of work on a lake with very, very poor internet connection. I had used my cell phone as a hotspot, but I was still managing to work remotely. And that sort of just cemented in my mind that I could essentially take my work anywhere. And so letting, a new generation of people, and the people who are even interested in becoming more digitally literate, that they don't have to totally uproot themselves to be connected to companies that exist in urban areas or city areas. My work itself has only been disrupted by maybe clients having to shift funding elsewhere, but the actual workload myself hasn't really changed. And I think that could be a great opportunity, and it's a good thing to remind people. And honestly, it would come down to giving the community better access to internet, so that wasn't a challenge, and then maybe bringing the necessary resources to them if they can't leave. But having people set up that they can work remotely, I think is really powerful.
Yeah, and to Ken's point, I think COVID has really demonstrated or has dispelled any myths people may have had or preconceived notions about remote working or not being in an urban setting. So thank you for sharing that. And anyone on the panel, from your perspectives, are there other industries that the marine industry, the ocean sector could look to? Is there an industry that is really a great example of that important Indigenous engagement, Noah, that you mentioned, that connection to community making? Chris, you mentioned, and Ken, about that sense of community and sense of belonging and understanding the bigger picture. Are there any industries that you would point to or examples that you would want to share? Perhaps some practices that we can share across sectors? Sorry, very open-ended question for anyone. Chief Sasha?
Well,
Go ahead.
Sasha can talk.
Oh.
Well, Go ahead, Chief.
Okay, so what comes to my mind, I guess, is there's a lot of examples in the academic and educational institutions where universities have, how would I say it, like a built-in friendship center or an engagement protocol. I wouldn't even really know what to call it, but when they do it well, it's obvious, and the benefits, you can see the benefits, and the inclusion of the Indigenous students are there. I had a specific example to New Brunswick also that I wanted to mention. We have a deep water port here in Beldoon, and with the port of Beldoon, it is in the marine industry, but they have what you call a relationship, engagement, and consultation protocol. And I do think that this kind of goes above and beyond just company policy. It was signed in 2017 with our community of Ukpiganchik, Eel River Bar, and the community of Pabineau, who is located in Bathurst, which we're both close to this port, and also with Mi'kmaq de Bloodahan, which is an organization of the Mi'kmaq bands in New Brunswick. And this protocol, like, it has three roles. So it's first is relationship building, and the second is consultation and accommodation, and third, proponent engagement with the Mi'kmaq First Nations. So when there's any industry that comes into the port as a new proponent, that engagement starts right away with the communities. So we don't hear about the project after. And the experiences, like, I can only speak for Eel River Bar, that we've had with different proponents have been meaningful. And it's about the engagement, but also, as it advances, like, these other issues are brought forward. So all topics. And I have to say, like, just with this example, it by far surpasses anything that New Brunswick government has in place. When we talk about the duty to consult, it's a legal thing. So this I just wanted to mention this as a good example.
That is a wonderful example and a very positive, forward-thinking example. So thank you for sharing that, Chief Sasha. Ken, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, like another example, which is an obvious one, is the fisheries. So we know the fisheries is a mature industry, but before 1999, the First Nations presence in the commercial fisheries was zero. Last year, the commercial value of First Nation fisheries was $120 million. And it directly employs 1,800 people, and indirectly another 600 or so. The reason why it came about, of course, was because of the Marshall decision, but the Federal Department of Fisheries and Oceans was obligated to help support this access. So what they've done is they've provided work with like the licenses and the boats, but the training is also really important. So a lot of the people that have been fishing for now 18 years commercially are the captains of the vessels. And there's other initiatives to use that own source revenue into the communities to diversify some of the business applications, not only in fisheries, but also in areas of marketing. They can do investments into community development. Chris and I have been working together for a number of years, and we also know financial literacy is also a very important issue that needs to be developed in the community itself, because the communities basically didn't have own source revenue outside of gaming. So that is very important. It gives a lot of people experience. The problem we have is not everybody wants to fish because it's hard work. And we have lots of other people in our communities are, like, for example, we have talented artists. Well, I would like to see more of our artists get involved with marketing and branding and all these other kind of aspects. I would like to see some of the people that are more attuned to being on the land itself get more involved in natural resources development, environmental monitoring, and things like that. But until we can sort of provide those opportunities and find good partners that are able to make that investment of time and sort of take a chance in working with our communities, it's difficult for us to build it within ourselves. For me, one of the keys of this is partnerships. So we're always looking for the good partners to actually work with.
Right. So that network of working together within Nova Scotia or the Atlantic provinces, finding those role models. I know Dr. Sherry Scully here at Cove is always interested in how do we find those mentors, those key role models that we've heard about that are so important, and get them, in front of the youth, connected to the youth, or connected to people who are looking for a second career. That whether it be in marketing in oceans, like you've said, Ken, there are all sorts of opportunities in the ocean sector. So how do we get those mentors connected? Chris, this might be a good question if you want to jump in here through the work that you do with Olnoag.
I think interestingly, that's a constant issue for us is finding those youth, right? And like I mentioned, there's more doctors and nurses that we're hearing of that are coming, the old saying, out of the woodwork, as they see more and more opportunities being developed for youth to actually be exposed to this. So as an example, we've tapped on young leaders like Noah Prosper and Tyler Sack, what's her name? Even the recent kind of personal announcement of a doctor from this area, Robert Johnson, who's in BC. He just announced personally that he's coming down here for kind of part-time work, and that just blew up social media because everybody likes to see their own and for the kids to be able to see their own Mi'kmaq person, at that level. And when we've been, for example, stuff like duck cardinal, bringing duck cardinal, all of a sudden you have 2 or 3 university students coming over at Digital Mi'kmaq now, who we do have a space in Halifax now in our office, come into our office, express an interest in working with the kids now, right? So now you're developing those mentorship roles that they can provide, but you also want them to attach them. You also want to attach them to their own mentors. Within the industry, right? So you do have those developing university students. You do want them to attach themselves to the Doug Cardinals of the world, to the Ken Pauls of the world, right? To make sure that they're developing especially when you have individuals like Ken himself and like Doug himself that are grounded in culture and language. That's so important for us, right? Make sure that the youth, when they get empowered, that they also are grounded in culture and identity, so that they don't question that when they go out. And that's not an item that they question or the community questions in any of their future leadership development. So that's one of the things that we're working and making sure that as part of youth capacity development, that culture and language will be very important in grounding them for the future.
Of course, that connection back to the culture. Thank you, Chris. Ken, before you have to leave, what are your parting words of wisdom for an Indigenous youth or just an Indigenous person looking for a career in the ocean sector?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you guys for the privilege of actually participating in this panel. It's and I really enjoyed, like my colleagues there. There's a lot of knowledge here within the other panelists that are available, and reach out to them. They're very, very knowledgeable. For youth, there are so many different kinds of job opportunities within the ocean sector itself. For people that want to fish, there's lots of fishing opportunities. But for people that want to do other things and stay in the Atlantic region, there is a plethora of highly technical fields. There's fields that you can get involved with in like policy and administration, if that's your kind of thing, in the environmental fields. And don't be afraid. If you are motivated, people will help you. This is sort of the thing that I've been able to, how I've been able to carry myself. And don't be afraid to take a chance, because the people that take the chance, sometimes you might fall back, but you will get experiences along the way. Your elders are there, your ancestors are there to support you. So whenever I have any kind of like existential crisis, I always sort of sit down and think, okay, if my grandfather was here with me, what would he think about me doing this? And that's what gets me through. So.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you. Appreciate your time and your insights, Ken. Noah, our youth panelist, what words of wisdom would you have for a young individual looking to a career in the ocean sector, or somebody looking for a second career in the ocean sector?
I think that it's a good idea to bring traditional knowledge forward when either if you're working in a team of a pre-established intellectual property, or you're planning on creating your own company with your own intellectual property or software. I guess what I'm trying to say is that my venture into the ocean economy was sort of by happenstance and realizing what the technology could do as we were developing it. And the whole venture for us started by wanting to create something that spoke to us culturally and that helped people understand the importance of the environment. It was originally a communications tool, and as we started building it, we realized it had grander implications for resource or land management, infrastructure at risk, agriculture. We've been doing some bathymetry, which is mapping the underwater and all that stuff. So yeah, you're not limited by what exists now in terms of industries. We need people with a different skill set to come in and shake things up, and innovate.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well said. Chief Sasha, any parting words of wisdom or thoughts to leave with the folks who are listening?
Sure. I guess what I've learned along the way is never be afraid to ask for help. You know, as I've heard from the other panelists, having a good mentor is really important. And there's a lot of great people out there that would be willing to mentor. It's just making that connection. Like, I know myself, if I was approached, I'd be more than willing to work with someone, provide advice. It's, I think if I just put myself back in time, you know, I might have been timid or thought to myself, well, they're busy, they don't have time for me. But I think we have to get that message out that, yes, we're open to helping, and just don't be shy.
Thank you, Chief Sasha, and you are a wonderful and strong leader that our youth can look up to. So appreciate your time today. And Chris, yeah, thank you. Chris, Gugu, any last thoughts from your perspective?
Well, again, thank you for the opportunity, as Ken mentioned, about being able to be on this panel. One thing I would mention, Denise, and is the whole notion that Mi'kmaq and Maliseet, Passamaquoddy, Inuit, our territory are broader than the Atlantic provinces. So when we're talking about children and are talking to our children about opportunities in our communities, that's the narrative that we have to say. It is our traditional territory, not the, in terms of First Nations, that the reserves are boundaries, but our traditional territories. That even includes, you know, Maine and Vermont and New Hampshire for the Mi'kmaq people. So in that aspect, that's where my head is at. I want to promote kids to go into our traditional territories, industries in all our traditional territories, and all the opportunities out there. And, you know, it was, as an example, it was enlightening to be part of I wasn't part of a discussion, I was just part of looking at the Zoom, but there was a kind of a 3-year get-together of the kids that we were involved in sending to France on a tall ship. 45 Indigenous youth. And so they got together on Zoom there and just to talk about, you know, their continuing journeys. And it goes back to what Ken had originally said, right? Don't be afraid. Get on that boat, right? And it all takes that one first step, and then your trajectory of what your life goes on is just going to change, and it's going to be changed for the better. And you're going to take along a lot of other youth that are looking up to you right now along that journey. You don't even know, but that impact, you are going to create that impact. So leave it at that.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for that. And thank you all for joining us today. Your thoughts and your knowledge and your insights have just been so amazing and so well said, so well spoken. I look forward to seeing this next generation who does carry the traditional values and who are so technologically advanced, bringing those two worlds together and really creating this amazing future in the ocean sectors and beyond. So thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you to everybody who listened in today. And if you want to know anything more about what's going on at Cove, they do host tenant talks. So there is one tomorrow, and you can find out about all the Cove events that happen on their website, which is www.coveocean.com. So un grand merci sincère, Welalen, thank you to all, and I hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.